It was a regular morning when the incident happened. One of those days where everything feels just a little bit off. I was walking to my car after a quick stop at the grocery store, a bag of fresh produce in hand, when I noticed a police car parked too close to the entrance. I didn't think much of it at first, just a cop doing his rounds. But as I got closer, I saw him, Officer Daniels, standing by his car, his eyes scanning the parking lot. And then, just as I stepped onto the pavement, he made eye contact with me. "Hey, you!" he called out, his voice sharp. I paused, the bag of groceries hanging in my hand, a cold feeling spreading in my stomach. I didn't recognize him, but I knew something was off by the way he was looking at me. I took a deep breath and approached. "Is there a problem, officer?" He looked me over, his gaze lingering a bit too long on my face. "You know why I'm stopping you?" he asked, his tone judgmental. I had been taught to stay calm in situations like this, no matter how uncomfortable or unfair they might feel. But this wasn't just about a simple stop. There was something more in his eyes, a hint of disdain. "No, officer," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "I'm just leaving the store." "Well, you fit the description of someone we've been looking for," he said, motioning for me to stop right where I was. "I need to ask you a few questions." I tried to remain calm, but inside I felt a chill running down my spine. Something didn't feel right. As he pulled out his handcuffs, I knew I had to do something. "I'd like to call my lawyer," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. Officer Daniels ignored me and started to cuff me. "You can make your call later." The ride to the station was a blur. I couldn't believe what was happening. Why me? Why now? I wasn't the one they were looking for, and I had done nothing wrong. But still, there I was, sitting in the back of a police car with my hands cuffed behind my back. The silence between the officer and me was thick, like there was something unsaid hanging in the air. I couldn't help but feel like this was more than just an arrest. It was about something deeper. His treatment of me was like I was already guilty, before he even knew anything about me. I had been through this before, but never like this. Never so blatantly unfair. As we pulled up to the station, I kept my focus on keeping my composure. I had learned long ago that people like me, black women, had to be twice as strong to make it through moments like these without being broken. After being processed, I sat in the small holding area at the station, waiting for the next step. The whole ordeal felt like a bad dream, except it was real. After a few hours, I was finally moved to the courthouse for my hearing. I walked into the courtroom, still feeling the weight of the situation. The room was full, people talking in hushed tones. The judge sat high above everyone, the proceedings feeling formal and detached. Then I saw him, Officer Daniels, sitting in the witness chair. He looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat as he glanced nervously at the judge. I couldn't help but wonder what his story was. What had led him to arrest me, to treat me the way he had? The prosecutor, another officer who I didn't recognize, began presenting their case, reading off charges that made no sense to me. As the proceedings continued, I felt my confidence growing. I knew this wasn't right. I knew that I had been arrested without cause, and that the truth would come out soon enough. And then, as the defense was about to present their argument, the moment I'd been waiting for came. The judge called for a break, and I stood up to stretch when a familiar face appeared. "Your Honor," I said, stepping forward. "I believe I need to speak." The judge looked down at me, surprised but nodding. "Go ahead." I turned to the officer on the stand, Officer Daniels. "I'm the state prosecutor," I said, my voice steady, each word deliberate. "And I'm pressing charges for wrongful arrest." The room went silent. The air felt thick with tension as the full weight of my words sank in. Officer Daniels froze. I could see his jaw clench, his eyes widening slightly, as if he had just been hit with a cold slap to the face. I continued, my voice unwavering. "I am the one who you decided to arrest, without cause, without reason, and for no other reason than the color of my skin. I'm also the one who holds the power to make your life very difficult from here on out. His eyes darted nervously to the judge, then back at me. His whole body seemed to shrink in on itself, the confidence he had had when he first arrested me gone. The courtroom was quiet, the weight of my revelation hanging in the air like an elephant. No one moved. No one spoke. The officer was no longer the one in control. I knew then that he had never imagined this would happen. He had never expected me to be the one standing in front of him, the one with the authority to change everything. The rest of the proceedings felt like a distant, muffled blur, as though I was watching everything unfold from outside my own body. My heart still pounded in my chest, but the sound of my own pulse seemed distant, drowned out by the weight of the moment. The judge, who had been mostly silent through the earlier exchanges, finally spoke up, breaking the tension in the air. He looked down at the case before him, his expression unreadable, but I could tell from the shift in his posture that he was taking this very seriously. "Officer Daniels." The judge's voice echoed through the courtroom, crisp and deliberate. "You've presented no substantial evidence to support your claims, and your conduct has raised several concerns." The words rang out in the silence, the judge's gaze unwavering. I could see Daniel still seated, his face drained of color, looking like someone who had just realized that the ground he was standing on had crumbled beneath him. He tried to speak, to defend himself, but his words fumbled out in a jumble. The once bold officer, who had arrested me with such ease, certain he could act with impunity, was now struggling to hold on to any semblance of his previous confidence. I had no idea, Your Honor," Officer Daniels stammered, his voice trembling. "I thought I was doing my job. I thought she was a suspect. He paused, his words trailing off as he realized that nothing he could say would salvage the situation. I stayed standing, my posture tall and firm, my eyes never leaving the officer's face. There was something cathartic about this moment, something I had needed to feel for so long. His arrogance, his dismissive treatment of me, it all came crashing down in front of everyone. The judge interrupted him, his voice sharp. "Officer Daniels, your actions have been grossly inappropriate. The case against Ms. Harris is hereby dismissed." He banged his gavel, finalizing the decision. I could feel the weight of the moment in my bones. The case that had seemed so absurd from the start, this whole ordeal, had unraveled before my eyes. For the first time in hours, I allowed myself to breathe, but there was no celebration, no triumph in the air, only the bitter taste of relief mixed with the anger that still burned in my chest. The courtroom began to stir as people packed up their things and murmured among themselves. It was over, but the damage had already been done. I stood still for a moment, letting everything sink in. Officer Daniels had been humbled in the most public way possible. His once defiant posture was now reduced to slumped shoulders and a downcast gaze. But my emotions were complicated. The relief of being vindicated didn't erase the anger that had been building since that first moment in the parking lot, when I had been treated as less than human. I turned toward the exit, trying to compose myself as I walked past the other officers. As I moved down the hallway, I could feel their eyes on me. Some avoided my gaze, some watched cautiously. The shift in the room was palpable. They had witnessed what had just unfolded. An officer who had assumed power over someone he deemed inferior had been brought to justice in front of everyone. And I knew from the way they couldn't meet my eyes that they were realizing just how badly they had underestimated me. They had thought I was just another black woman who wouldn't fight back, but I had proven them wrong. I stepped out of the courthouse, the heavy door clicking shut behind me, and I felt a wave of quiet exhaustion wash over me. The city seemed strangely muted as I walked to my car, the world outside unchanged. But I was different. I had taken a stand, not just for myself, but for every person who had ever been treated as less, as invisible. The drive home was a blur of thoughts. My hands gripped the steering wheel, but my mind was still spinning from everything that had happened. It felt as though the weight of the world had been lifted off my shoulders, but at the same time, a new weight had settled in. I wasn't sure what would come next, but I knew the battle was far from over. The The system was still broken, and Officer Daniels was not the only one who needed to be held accountable. This was a small victory, but one that had to be built on. I pulled into my driveway, the silence of my car giving me space to breathe. For the first time in hours, I let out a shaky breath, feeling my shoulders drop, the tension leaving my body, if only for a moment. The weight of the day, the frustration, the anger, the fear, it all lingered, but I had won. As I sat in the car, I closed my eyes for a second, letting the silence embrace me. I had proven that not all injustices go unnoticed, and not all battles are lost. And I knew, deep down, that the fight was just beginning.